What if your entire life could change in the time it takes to pour a glass of water? For Elena Ramirez, a waitress drowning in debt and family medical bills. That's exactly what happened. She was serving the city's most powerful billionaire, Arthur Sterling, during a private dinner meeting that would decide the fate of his multi-billion-dollar empire. The papers were on the table. The $100,000 pen was in his hand, ready to sign away his legacy. But Elena saw something no one else did, a single toxic sentence buried in the fine print. In a world where she was invisible, she had to make a choice: stay silent and keep her job, or risk everything on a desperate warning. What she whispered next, and the billionaire's shocking response, would leave everyone in that room utterly breathless. The Gilded Lantern wasn't just a restaurant. It was a theater where the modern gods of finance and industry performed their nightly rituals, nestled on the 64th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, its windows framed the glittering tapestry of New York City. The air inside hummed with the low murmur of power, smelling of aged leather truffle oil and old money. For the staff, it was a world they could serve, but never enter. For Elena Ramirez, it was a gilded cage. Every evening, she traded her worn-out sneakers for polished black flats, her faded jeans for a starched anonymous uniform. She tied her dark, wavy hair into a severe bun, a style designed to make her blend into the mahogany paneling. Blending in was the job. Be efficient, be invisible, be silent. But Elena saw everything. She noticed the subtle tremor in the hand of a CEO who'd just lost a fortune, the forced smile of a socialite sitting opposite her husband's mistress, the desperate hunger in the eyes of a young banker trying to impress a client. She was a ghost collecting secrets, a silent confessor in a temple of ambition. This life was a universe away from her dreams. 3 years ago, she had been Elena Ramirez, top of her class at Columbia Law, a scholarship student with a mind as sharp as a scalpel. She could dissect legal arguments, untangle complex contractual clauses, and quote precedents from memory. Her future had been a gleaming skyscraper of its own. Then the phone call came. Her mother, a single parent who had worked 2 jobs to raise her, had collapsed. A rare aggressive form of multiple sclerosis. The diagnosis was a wrecking ball. Elena dropped out of law school 1 semester short of graduation. The mountain of medical debt grew faster than the ivy on Columbia's walls. So she took the best-paying job she could find that didn't require a degree, serving the very people she once aspired to be. The irony was a bitter pill she swallowed with every shift. Her days were for her mother appointments, physical therapy reading to her when her eyes grew tired. Her nights were for the Gilded Lantern. Her most notable regular was Arthur Sterling. Sterling wasn't like the others. He was old money, but with the grit of a street fighter. He'd inherited a modest manufacturing business, and through decades of ruthless innovation and uncanny foresight, had forged it into Sterling Enterprises, a global tech and logistics behemoth. He was a titan, a living legend, whispered about on Wall Street. Yet when he came to the restaurant, he was often alone. Since his wife Evelyn had passed away 2 years ago, a profound sadness had settled over him, as permanent as the worry lines etched into his forehead. He'd sit in his usual corner booth, a glass of Macallan 25, untouched for the first 10 minutes, simply staring out at the city he had in many ways conquered. He was always polite to Eleanor, looking her in the eye and saying, "Thank you, Eleanor," using her name, a small courtesy that felt like a lifeline in her world of anonymity. Tonight, however, was different. Arthur Sterling was not alone. He had booked the most exclusive private dining room, the Olympus Room. A sound-proofed sanctuary with a private balcony and a single immense redwood table polished to a mirror shine. He was joined by two men Elena knew by sight. The first was Marcus Thorne, the COO of Sterling Enterprises. Thorne was everything Arthur Sterling was not: slick, impeccably tailored, with a smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He was the chosen successor, the brilliant protégé who had helped Sterling Enterprises triple its value in the last decade. He radiated a hungry, restless energy. The second man was Julian Vance, Sterling's personal lawyer and friend of 40 years. Vance was a portly man with a gentle demeanor, his face usually arranged in a look of paternal concern. He was the trusted confidant, the man who had drafted every major contract, every will, every trust for the Sterling family for 2 generations. He was family. Elena was assigned to the Olympus room. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Dmitri, had been clear. "Not a single mistake, Ramirez. This is the most important dinner we've hosted all year. They need privacy, perfection, and silence. Understand?" She understood. As she pushed the serving cart laden with chilled bottles of Voss water and crystal glasses into the room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. It wasn't the easy rapport of old friends. It was the charged silence of a summit on the brink of war. Or perhaps a surrender. Piles of documents bound in expensive blue leather sat in the center of the table. The title embossed in gold foil was stark: the Sterling Legacy Trust and Succession Mandate. This was it. The handing over of a kingdom. Marcus was speaking in a low, persuasive tone. "Arthur, this is about securing the future. It's what Evelyn would have wanted. A seamless transition, protecting the company from corporate raiders, from market volatility, from any future uncertainties." Julian Vance nodded, his expression somber. "Every clause has been vetted by my entire firm, Arthur. It's ironclad. It protects you, it protects your daughter Sarah, and it ensures the company you built will outlive us all." Arthur Sterling said nothing. He stared at the document, his hand resting on the cover, his face a mask of weary resignation. Elena knew of his daughter Sarah. The gossip columns painted her as a rebellious artist who wanted nothing to do with her father's empire. There had been a falling out years ago, a wound that had never properly healed. Elena began her silent work, pouring water with a steady hand, her movements economical and precise. But her mind was racing. Her legal training, though dormant, was not dead. It was a phantom limb, and tonight it was beginning to ache. The dinner was a somber affair. The food, a meticulously crafted 7-course menu from a celebrity chef, was barely touched. The conversation was stilted, revolving around legal jargon and corporate strategy. Elena moved in and out of the room, a silent spectre, clearing plates and refilling glasses. Each time she entered, she caught snippets of the conversation, piecing together the narrative like a shattered vase. "The board has already given its preliminary approval based on the outline," Marcus said, gesturing towards the document. "This is just the final execution, the last step." "The trusteeship clause is the key," Julian added, pointing a thick finger at a page. "It creates a firewalled administrative body managed by a board of trustees, namely Marcus and myself, to oversee all voting shares. It's for stability, Arthur, to prevent any single party, even a family member, from making an emotional decision that could jeopardize the company." Arthur Sterling remained quiet, his gaze distant. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass, the ice clinking softly, a lonely sound in the hushed room. Elena felt a pang of sympathy for him. He looked like a king being politely escorted to his own abdication. He seemed tired not of the business, but of the fight. The fire that had built an empire was banking low. As she served the main course, a Wagyu steak that cost more than her weekly grocery bill, her eyes fell upon the documents again. Marcus had pushed one of the copies aside to make room for his plate, leaving it open. It was a page filled with dense, numbered paragraphs, a forest of legalese designed to be impenetrable to the layman. But Elena wasn't a layman. For a fleeting second, her gaze scanned the text. It was a force of habit, the muscle memory of 1,000 late nights in the law library. Her eyes snagged on a phrase. In the event of the founder's voluntary retirement resignation for personal reasons or medically certified incapacitation. It was standard language for a succession document. But it was the next part in a subsection further down that made the blood freeze in her veins. All voting rights of the founder's Class A shares shall be irrevocably and permanently transferred to the Sterling Legacy Trust to be administered by the appointed primary trustees for the operational lifetime of the corporation. Irrevocably and permanently. The words echoed in her mind. She remembered a specific brutal case study from her third-year contract law class with Professor Albright. It was called the Ambush Clause. A corporate takeover artist had used nearly identical language to swindle the founder of a family-owned pharmaceutical company. The founder intended to retire and leave the company to his children, but the trust document he signed had a hidden trigger. The moment he signed his retirement papers, he didn't just transfer management. He permanently severed his family's voting control. The company was legally stolen from them in broad daylight, using the founder's own signature as the weapon. Professor Albright had hammered it home. The deadliest words in a contract are never the ones shouted in the boardroom. They're the ones whispered in the fine print. Irrevocable, permanent, in perpetuity. These are words that build cages. Elena's heart began to pound against her ribs. Could it be the same thing Julian Vance was one of the most resected lawyers in New York? Marcus Thorne was Sterling's hand-picked heir. It seemed impossible. It had to be a misunderstanding, her rusty legal knowledge playing tricks on her. She continued her work, her hands moving on autopilot. But her mind was on fire. She replayed the words. Voluntary retirement. Medically certified incapacitation. What defined that? A doctor paid by the trustees. And who were the primary trustees, Marcus and Julian? What about Sarah? His daughter. The document was supposed to protect her. But if this clause did what Elena feared, it would completely disinherit her from any control. She would get the money, the dividends. But the power, the real legacy would belong to Thorne and Vance forever. The moral calculus was dizzying. Her job, her only source of income to care for her mother, depended on her invisibility. Voicing a suspicion like this wasn't just stepping out of line. It was professional suicide. She would be fired on the spot, probably blacklisted from every high-end establishment in the city. They would call her crazy, a disgruntled employee, a nobody trying to interfere in things she couldn't possibly understand. They would be right. She was a nobody. A waitress. But then she looked at Arthur Sterling. She saw the grief still etched around his eyes, the weariness of a man who had lost his anchor. He trusted these men. He was signing this document because he believed it was what his late wife Evelyn would have wanted. He was being guided into a trap by the two people he trusted most in the world. The image of her own mother, frail but fighting, flashed in her mind. Her mother had taught her that integrity was the one thing in life no one could take from you, You could only give it away. What was she going to do? Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at her to stay silent, to finish her shift, collect her tips, and go home. But the voice of Professor Albright, the memory of her own abandoned principles, the sight of this old, lonely man being led to the slaughter, it was a chorus she couldn't ignore. Dessert was served. Coffee was poured. And then Julian Vance slid the final signature page in front of Arthur, placing a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen beside it. "Just here, Arthur," Julian said softly, his voice smooth as silk. "And it's done. Your legacy is safe." Marcus Thorne leaned forward, a predatory stillness in his posture. His smile was tight, expectant. The pen was uncapped. The nib hovered over the paper. The world seemed to shrink to that single, terrifying point of contact. Elena knew she had only seconds to act. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning like molten glass. The scrape of the pen's nib against the thick, creamy paper was an impending gunshot in the silent room. Arthur Sterling's hand was steady, his expression one of finality. He was ready to lay down his burden. Elena's mind raced a frantic search for a plan. She couldn't just shout. She couldn't accuse. She had one chance, one bullet, and it had to be impossibly precise. She took a deep breath, picked up the silver water pitcher from her service tray, and moved towards the table. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, so loud she was sure the men could hear it. Her steps were deliberate, measured a perfect imitation of a waitress doing her job. As she reached Arthur Sterling's side, her hand, the one holding the heavy pitcher, made a tiny, almost imperceptible jerk. It was a motion she had practiced 1,000 times to avoid, but now she summoned it with all her will. A small amount of ice-cold water sloshed over the rim. It didn't hit the precious document, but it landed on the polished redwood table just inches from it, a spreading dark pool that broke the pristine surface. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, I am so terribly sorry." She gasped, her voice, a mixture of practiced deference and genuine heart-stopping fear. "How clumsy of it of me. Please forgive me." Marcus Thorne shot her a look of pure venom. "Watch what you're doing, you idiot!" He hissed, his voice a low whip crack. Julian Vance simply looked annoyed, as if a fly had buzzed into the sacred space. But the gambit worked. The motion was interrupted. Arthur Sterling lifted the pen. His focus broken. He looked from the spill to Elena, his expression more weary than angry. "It's all right. Just a little water. No harm done." Elena quickly produced a linen cloth from her apron. As she leaned over to blot the spill, she brought her head close to Arthur's shoulder, creating a bubble of intimacy in the hostile room. The scent of her clean, simple soap was a stark contrast to the expensive cologne worn by the other men. This was her moment. Her voice was barely a breath, a ghost of a sound meant only for his ear. "Don't sign that," she whispered, her words urgent and sharp. Arthur Sterling froze. He didn't turn his head, but she felt the muscles in his shoulder tense beneath his expensive suit jacket. She pressed on the words, tumbling out in a torrent of controlled panic. "Page 14, Section 3, Subsection B. The trusteeship clause. It's an ambush clause. Irrevocable." She pulled back, dabbing the last of the water from the table. Her work was done. She stood up straight, her face a mask of professional neutrality, and retreated a few steps from the table, her hands clasped behind her back. She had thrown the grenade. Now she had to wait for the explosion. For a long moment, nothing happened. The silence in the room was absolute profound. It felt as if the air had been sucked out. Marcus Thorne was the first to break it, a humorless chuckle escaping his lips. "What was that? Did the help offer you some legal advice, Arthur?" He turned his glare back on Elena. "You're fired. Get your things and get out. Now." Julian Vance adjusted his tie, his face flushed with indignation. "This is absurd. The girl is clearly unstable. Security should be called." But Arthur Sterling didn't look at them. He didn't look at Elena. He was staring at the signature line, the pen still held loosely in his hand. Her words had been a key, turning a lock deep inside him. A lock he had forgotten was there. It was his instinct. The same gut feeling that had told him to buy when others sold to invest in a technology no one understood, to trust a young engineer with a wild idea. It was the instinct that had built his empire, and for the past 2 years it had been dormant, buried under a fog of grief. Now it was screaming. He saw it all in a flash. Marcus's unnerving eagerness, Julian's practiced, almost funereal solemnity, the constant pressure over the last few months, the way they isolated him from other advisors, the way they dismissed his daughter's concerns as childish rebellion. It hadn't made sense in pieces, but now, with Eleanor's whispered warning as the catalyst, the pieces were snapping together into a terrifying picture. He slowly, deliberately placed the uncapped pen on the table, perfectly parallel to the document. The small click it made echoed like a gavel. Then he lifted his head, and for the first time that evening, the fog in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by the hard, diamond-sharp clarity that had made him a legend. He looked past Marcus, past Julian, and his gaze landed directly on Eleanor, who stood frozen by the service station. The whole room held its breath. Marcus and Julian expected him to laugh, to apologize for the interruption, to have her thrown out. They expected him to sign. His next move stunned them all. "Young lady." Arthur Sterling's voice was quiet, but it resonated with an authority that had been absent all night. It was the voice that commanded boardrooms and brought markets to their knees. "You have my attention." Marcus Thorne's jaw went slack. "Arthur, what are you doing? She's a waitress. This is a complete and utter farce." "Be quiet, Marcus," Arthur said without taking his eyes off Elena. The command was soft, but it cut through the air like a razor. Marcus flinched, as if struck, his mouth clamping shut. Arthur Sterling gestured with an open palm toward the empty chair beside him, a seat intended for a high-level executive, not a server. "Please," he said. "Sit down." The invitation was so unexpected, so contrary to the rigid hierarchy of their world, that for a moment no one moved. Elena felt a wave of vertigo. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Sitting at the table was not just breaking the rules, it was shattering the very fabric of her reality. "Arthur, for God's sake," Julian Vance sputtered, his face now a blotchy red. "This is beyond inappropriate. We are in the middle of executing a $9 billion trust agreement. You cannot possibly be taking legal counsel from a food server." Arthur finally turned his gaze to his old friend. The look in his eyes was cold steel. "Julian, for 40 years I have paid you millions of dollars for your counsel. Tonight I am being offered some for free. I'm a businessman. I never turn down a free sample." His eyes flickered back to Elena. "The chair, Miss Ramirez," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Eleanor Ramirez? Miss Ramirez. Please." Her legs felt like lead, but she forced them to move. She walked the few steps to the table, her server's shoes silent on the plush carpet. She pulled out the heavy leather chair and sat down, her back ramrod straight. She was acutely aware of her simple black uniform, the faint scent of kitchen steam that clung to her. She was a crow at a table of peacocks. Arthur slid the bound document across the polished table toward her. "Show me." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the document. The expensive paper felt alien beneath her fingertips. She quickly flipped through the pages, her lawyer's mind taking over, the fear receding as the familiar structure of the legal text came into focus. She found the page. Page 14. "Here," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of confidence. She pointed to Section 3, subsection B. The language used here, to revocably and permanently transferred to the Sterling Legacy Trust, is the mechanism. "Mechanism for what?" Arthur asked, his eyes boring into her. "For a hostile takeover disguised as a succession plan." Elena said the words coming out more forcefully than she intended. A vein throbbed in Marcus Thorne's temple. "This is slander." She has no idea what she's talking about. "Arthur, this is insane." Eleanor ignored him, speaking directly to Arthur. "The clause is triggered by one of 3 events: your voluntary retirement, your resignation, or medically certified incapacitation. The first 2 seem straightforward, but the third? Who makes that certification? According to Section 5, it's a medical panel appointed by the primary trustees." She looked up from the page. "The document appoints Mr. Thorne and Mr. Vance as the sole primary trustees." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "So if I were to have a stroke," Arthur said, his voice dangerously low, "or if I were to develop dementia, or if a doctor on their payroll simply said I had, they would take control. Not temporary stewardship. Permanent control." "Yes," Elena affirmed. "And because the transfer is irrevocable, your daughter Sarah could never reclaim it. She would be a beneficiary of the trust's financial distributions, but she would have 0 voting power. She would be a passenger in the company your family built. The control of Sterling Enterprises would pass to Mr. Thorne and Mr. Vance in perpetuity." Julian Vance finally found his voice, a blustering, indignant roar. "This is a gross misinterpretation of a standard protective clause. It is designed to prevent a hostile party from taking advantage of a leadership vacuum. You are twisting it, you ignorant girl." "Then, why?" Elena countered, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Is there no clawback provision? Why is there no clause for a vote by the board or shareholders to reverse the trusteeship in the event of your recovery? Why is the word irrevocable tied to the transfer of voting rights, and not just the formation of the trust itself? A proper protective clause would have fail-safes. This document has a door that only locks from the inside." Silence. The legal precision of her argument, the calm, irrefutable logic hung in the air. She wasn't just a waitress with a hunch. She had dissected their weapon and laid its pieces on the table for all to see. Arthur Sterling leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a lion who had been sleeping in the sun, only to be woken by the foolish prodding of jackals. He had been played. For months, maybe years, he had been coddled, managed, and steered toward this exact moment by the 2 men he trusted most. He looked at Marcus, whose face was a mask of pale, sweaty fury. He looked at Julian, who was avoiding his gaze, staring down at his manicured hands as if he'd never seen them before. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute it was almost elegant in its treachery. Then Arthur Sterling did something that shocked the room, even more than his invitation to Eleanor. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and unlocked it. He didn't call security. He didn't call the police. He scrolled through his contacts and pressed a name. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. "David. It's Arthur. Yes, I know it's late. I need you to wake up. I'm sending you a photograph of a single page of a contract. I need to know if I'm about to sign my own death warrant." He paused, listening. "No, not Julian. This requires a fresh pair of eyes. Eyes that still work for me." He ended the call, took a photo of page 14 with a steady hand, and sent it. Then he placed the phone face up on the table. The screen glowed in the silent room, a digital bonfire around which they all sat waiting for a verdict. The wait was agonizing. The 10 minutes that followed felt like an eternity, stretched thin by the suffocating silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of the city and the frantic, shallow breathing of Marcus Thorne. Julian Vance sat as still as a statue, his face a pasty, unreadable mask. He seemed to have aged a decade in the last few moments. Elena remained in her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt as if she were in a dream, a spectator to a drama she had unwittingly set in motion. She had done her part. The rest was out of her hands. Finally, the phone on the table buzzed the vibration unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. A text message appeared on the screen. Arthur leaned forward to read it, his expression grim. He then swiped to answer the incoming call, putting it on speaker for the entire room to hear. "Arthur, it's David." The voice on the phone was raspy, the sound of a man in his late 70s who had just been jolted from sleep. "Where in God's name did you get us this document?" "It's my new legacy trust, David. Julian drafted it." Arthur said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. There was a dry, mirthless laugh from the other end. "Julian Vance drafted this, Arthur. This isn't a trust document. It's a guillotine. The language in subsection B is predatory. It's a legal landmine. If you sign this, you're not securing your legacy. You're giving it away. Whoever signs this contract gives up permanent control of their voting shares under a ludicrously broad set of conditions. It's airtight vicious, and frankly, it's malpractice of the highest order. It's the kind of thing you'd slip to a business rival, not a friend." The disembodied voice of David, a retired but legendary corporate lawyer known for his ferocity, was the final nail in the coffin. "Thank you, David," Arthur said quietly. "That's all I needed to know." He ended the call and placed the phone back on the table. The dam of denial broke. "Arthur, I can explain." Julian began, his voice cracking with desperation. "It's a misunderstanding. The language is aggressive, I admit, but it's for maximum protection. I was thinking of you." "Were you Julian?" Arthur's voice was soft, but it carried a terrifying weight. "Were you thinking of me when you made yourself and Marcus the sole permanent trustees? Were you thinking of me when you wrote a clause that would let you strip my own daughter of her birthright? Were you thinking of our 40 years of friendship when you drafted my surrender and called it a succession plan?" Julian Vance deflated the bluster and indignation draining out of him, leaving a slumped, defeated old man. He buried his face in his hands, unable to meet Arthur's gaze. Arthur then turned his attention to Marcus Thorne. "And you, my protégé, the son I never had, I gave you everything, a career, my trust, my mentorship, and all along you were just waiting for me to get old and tired, waiting to slide the knife in." Marcus, unlike Julian, did not crumble. A sneer twisted his handsome features, the mask of the loyal subordinate finally dropping away to reveal the seething resentment beneath. "You gave me nothing I didn't earn 10 times over." He spat, his voice trembling with rage. "I built this company with you. I dragged it into the 21st century while you were still mourning the past. It's my legacy as much as it is yours. You were never going to give it to me. You were always going to let that ungrateful artsy daughter of yours run it into the ground. I did what I had to do to protect what I built." "What you built?" Arthur Sterling slowly rose from his chair. He was not a tall man, but at that moment he seemed to fill the room, his presence immense, a force of nature. "You built nothing. You are a caretaker, a manager. You don't build Marcus. You scheme, you plot, you take." He walked around the table until he was standing behind Marcus and Julian. He placed a hand on each of their shoulders, a gesture that was shockingly intimate and menacing. "Here's what is going to happen," he said, his voice a low growl. "You are both going to remain in this room. You will not make any calls. You will not send any emails. In about 5 minutes, my head of security, a man far more loyal than either of you, will come in. He will escort you from the building. Your corporate accounts will be frozen. Your access will be revoked. By 9 a.m. tomorrow, my new legal team will be filing a lawsuit for conspiracy and attempted corporate fraud. I will not just fire you. I will ruin you. I will dismantle your careers so thoroughly that you won't be able to get a job managing a hot dog stand. Am I clear?" Neither man answered. They sat broken under the weight of his words. Arthur took his hands off them as if they were contaminated. He walked back to his seat, his movements weary but resolute. The battle was over. The traitors had been vanquished. He then looked across the table at Eleanor, who had watched the entire scene unfold with a mixture of terror and awe. The room was now a graveyard of a 40-year friendship and a decade-long mentorship. And she, the waitress, was the only other living soul in it. He sat down, the anger draining from his face, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. He looked at her, his eyes holding a complex swirl of gratitude, curiosity, and respect. "Miss Ramirez," he said, his voice returning to a normal conversational tone, "I believe I owe you a debt of gratitude that I can never truly repay." He paused, studying her face. "But I'm more interested in something else right now. Where did a waitress learn to dismantle a contract like a seasoned litigator?" The question hung in the air, a bridge between her world and his. The immediate danger had passed, but for Elena, the most life-altering conversation of her life was just beginning. Elena swallowed hard, the adrenaline from the confrontation beginning to recede, leaving a shaky uncertainty in its wake. All eyes in the room, Arthur's intense, searching gaze, and the defeated, hateful glares from Marcus and Julian were on her. She started, her voice faltering for the first time. "I studied law at Columbia." Arthur's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Columbia law. That's not an easy place to get into, even harder to excel at. What happened?" The question was simple, but the answer was the entire story of her broken dreams. She looked down at her hands. The hands that carried heavy trays and polished silverware hands that should have been carrying legal briefs. "My mother," she said softly. "She fell ill, a severe case of MS. I was 1 semester away from graduating. But the medical bills, the care she needed, I had to drop out. I had to work." She didn't elaborate on the crushing weight of the debt, the sleepless nights, the constant worry. She didn't need to. The simple facts were enough. A look of understanding, of genuine empathy, softened Arthur Sterling's features. He had known loss. He knew what it was to have your world upended by illness. He nodded slowly, processing her story. So you gave up your future to take care of your family. He stated not as a question, but as a confirmation. It was a summary of her life for the past 3 years, a sacrifice he understood. Integrity. It seems to be a rare commodity tonight. He fell silent for a moment, lost in thought. Marcus and Julian sat like prisoners on death row, their fate sealed, forced to witness this strange unfolding rapport between the titan they tried to dethrone and the waitress who had stopped them. Finally, Arthur spoke again, his tone shifting from contemplative to decisive. The Gilded Lantern pays you what, $15 an hour plus tips. On a good night, you might clear $500. Eleanor was taken aback by the bluntness of the question, but nodded. Something like that. It's not enough, he said simply. Not for the mind you have, not for the character you've shown. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. Miss Ramirez, I find myself in a difficult position. My company is in turmoil. My entire executive leadership is compromised. The 2 men I trusted to protect my legacy have just tried to steal it. I have a mess to clean up, a very large, very complicated, and very ugly mess. He paused, his eyes locking onto hers. I need people I can trust. More than that, I need people who are not just loyal, but intelligent. People who see the details others miss. People who have the courage to speak up when something is wrong, no matter the personal risk. Elena's heart began to beat faster again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from a fragile, terrifying flicker of hope. I'm not offering you a reward, Miss Ramirez. Arthur continued, making the distinction clear. A reward is a thank you note, a cash bonus you can put in the bank. I want to offer you something else. I want to offer you an opportunity. He let the word hang in the air. Tomorrow morning, I'm forming a transition team. Its purpose will be to conduct a full top-to-bottom audit of Sterling Enterprises. We will go through every contract, every department, every executive's portfolio. We're going to hunt for every other instance of fraud, waste, and betrayal that Marcus and his cronies have hidden in my company. It will be a long and difficult task. He took a breath. I want you on that team. Elena was speechless. The offer was so far beyond the realm of possibility that she couldn't process it. Her on a corporate transition team. She was a waitress, a law school dropout. Mr. Sterling, she stammered. I don't have a degree. I'm not qualified. You're not qualified. He cut her off, not unkindly. Miss Ramirez, tonight, you did what my entire board, my external auditors, and my 40-year friend and lawyer failed to do. You saved my company with one whispered sentence. You saw in 10 seconds what they managed to hide for months. As far as I'm concerned, your qualification is undeniable. You have a talent that can't be taught in a classroom. It's called clarity, and it's priceless. He named a starting salary. It was a staggering number, more than she made in 5 years at the restaurant. It was enough to pay off every one of her mother's medical bills, to hire the best care to finally breathe. But it was more than the money. It was the second chance she never thought she would get. A chance to reclaim the future that had been stolen from her. There's a condition, Arthur added, his expression serious. Your first assignment will be to work with my daughter Sarah. She distrusted Marcus from the start, but I was too stubborn to listen. I need to rebuild that bridge. You two will work together, starting with this mess. He gestured to the fraudulent document. You will help her understand the business she is set to inherit. and perhaps you will help me reconnect with my own family." The doors to the Olympus room opened. A large, stern-faced man in a dark suit stepped inside. Arthur's head of security. He looked at Arthur, awaiting his orders. Arthur Sterling gestured towards the two disgraced executives. "Frank, please escort Mr. Thorne and Mr. Vance out of the building. They are not to touch anything on their way out." Frank nodded, his expression impassive, and moved to flank the two men. Marcus Thorne rose, his face a mask of pure hatred, and shot one last venomous glare at Elena before he was led away. Julian Vance didn't look at anyone. He just shuffled out, a ghost, leaving the scene of his own haunting. The room was quiet again. It was just Elena and Arthur Sterling. The waitress and the billionaire. But the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. They were no longer servant and customer. They were something else entirely. Elena looked at the man who was offering her a lifeline, a way back to the life she thought she had lost forever. She thought of her mother, of the endless shifts, of the crushing weight she had carried for 3 years. And for the first time in a long time, she saw a light at the end of the tunnel. She took a deep, steadying breath, the waitress receding and the lawyer re-emerging. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I accept." 6 months later, Eleanor Ramirez stood at the head of a long obsidian table in the main boardroom of Sterling Enterprises. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and unspoken tension. She was not serving the coffee. She was leading the meeting. Her voice was calm and measured as she clicked to the final slide of her presentation. It detailed a proposed restructuring of the company's venture capital division, a sector Marcus Thorne had used as his personal slush fund. Across the table, a bulldog of a man named Robert Davenport, a board member and old friend of Arthur's from the pre-Thorne era, scowled. "With all due respect, Miss Ramirez," Davenport began, his tone dripping with condescension. "It seems rather aggressive. You're proposing we liquidate assets that on paper are still profitable. It's a radical move for someone with limited corporate experience." The barb, someone like you, hung unspoken in the air. In the early weeks, comments like that had made her blood run cold, feeding the roaring voice of imposter syndrome in her mind. They saw the suit, but they remembered the story of the waitress. Today, however, she simply met his gaze without flinching. "With all due respect, Mr. Davenport," she countered her tone perfectly. "Even. Profitability on paper and actual asset value can be two very different things, as the last 6 months have proven. The profits from these holdings are routed through 3 offshore entities before they appear on our books. After forensic accounting, we've found that nearly 20 cents on every dollar is lost to administrative fees paid to a management company that until last month was secretly owned by Marcus Thorne's brother-in-law." She paused, letting the information settle. "My proposal isn't about radicalism. It's about cauterizing a wound. We liquidate, we absorb the cash, and we reinvest in transparent domestic startups. It's not just financially prudent, it's a matter of corporate integrity." Silence. Davenport leaned back, his scowl replaced by a look of grudging respect. Beside him, Sarah Sterling, newly appointed to the board, gave Eleanor a subtle approving nod. At the head of the table, Arthur Sterling said nothing, but a slow, satisfied smile touched his lips. The motion was passed unanimously. Later, standing before the floor-to-ceiling window in her own office on the 80th floor, Eleanor allowed herself a moment to breathe. The view of the city sprawled beneath her was a breathtaking panorama of steel and light. It was the same city, but her place in it had been fundamentally remade. She was no longer a ghost serving its kings. She was a queen in her own right, learning the geography of her new kingdom. The journey had been a trial by fire. The first month had been a blur of 16-hour days, fueled by caffeine and a desperate need to prove she belonged. She and Sarah had practically lived in a secure data room, poring over a decade's worth of contracts, emails, and financial statements. The breakthrough had come at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. While tracing a series of odd charitable donations, Elena noticed a pattern quarterly payments to a foundation called the Evelyn Tribute Fund. It seemed sentimental, a touching gesture by Marcus to honor Arthur's late wife. But Elena's instincts, honed by suspicion, screamed that something was wrong. After days of digging through international incorporation records, she found the fund was a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, and its sole director was Julian Vance's daughter. It was the smoking gun, the key that unlocked the full scope of their vast, intricate web of deceit. That discovery had changed everything. The whispers in the hallways stopped. The condescending looks were replaced by wary respect. She was no longer Arthur's waitress. She was Eleanor Ramirez, the woman who saw what everyone else had missed. A soft knock came at her door. It was Sarah holding 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "To the victor go the spoils," Sarah said, handing one to Elena. "I thought Davenport was going to have an aneurysm when you brought up the brother-in-law. It was beautiful." Elena laughed, the tension of the meeting finally melting away. He needed to hear it. The old guard has to understand that the way things were is not the way things are going to be. "That's why Dad trusts you," Sarah said, her expression turning serious as she leaned against the window beside Elena. "You're not afraid of the way things were. You help me see things I'm too close to notice, and I help you navigate the political minefield. We make a good team." "The best," Elena agreed, meaning it. Their friendship had become the anchor in her new, often turbulent world. "Speaking of which," Sarah continued, "the first round of scholarships for the Sterling Legacy Foundation are being announced next week. Your old law professor Albright is chairing the selection committee. He apparently speaks of you as if you're a legal folk hero." Elena felt a flush of pride. The foundation, funded by the assets seized from Thorne and Vance's criminal enterprise, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire ordeal. Its dual mission, providing scholarships for underprivileged law students and funding research into neurological diseases, was a testament to turning something ugly into something beautiful. That weekend, Elena drove out of the city to the quiet, sunlit care facility where her mother now lived. The sterile, frightening scent of a hospital had been replaced by the smell of fresh flowers and baking bread. She found her mother in a bright solarium, sitting in a comfortable high-tech wheelchair, looking out over a garden. The change in her was remarkable. Freed from financial stress and with access to the best treatments, a light had returned to her eyes. "You look tired, mija," her mother said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Good tired," Elena replied, settling into a chair beside her. "We had a big week." She spent the next hour telling her mother not about the corporate battles, but about the foundation, about the young students whose lives they were about to change. Her mother listened patiently, then reached out and took her hand. "You know, for 3 years I watched you disappear, a little more each day. You were working so hard to keep me afloat, but you were drowning. That night at the restaurant, you didn't just save that man, Elena." Her mother squeezed her hand. "You remembered how to save yourself?" On Monday morning, Arthur Sterling called both Elena and Sarah into his private office, the grand wood-panelled room that had once belonged to his own father. He stood looking at an old photograph on his desk of him and his wife Evelyn taken decades ago. She never trusted Marcus, Arthur said quietly, as if speaking to himself. She said he was too smooth, that his ambition had no heart. I told her she was being unfair. He turned to face them, his eyes filled with a sad wisdom. A legacy isn't about the buildings you own or the stock price. It's about the character of the people you leave behind to carry it on. For too long, I had the wrong people. He looked at his daughter, his love and pride evident. Sarah, the board, has formally approved my recommendation. You will be taking over as CEO at the end of the fiscal year. Then he turned to Elena. And Elena, your new title will be Chief Counsel and Head of Strategic Oversight for Sterling Enterprises. You will answer to no one but the CEO and the board. It wasn't an offer. It was a coronation. He was formally passing the torch, not just to his bloodline, but to the new family they had forged in the crucible of betrayal. Later that evening, Elena stood alone once more at her window. The city lights below twinkled like a fallen constellation. She could just make out the building that housed the gilded lantern, a tiny beacon in the vast darkness. She no longer felt the sting of her time there, only a strange, profound gratitude. It was the place where her two lives, the one she was forced into and the one she was meant for, had finally miraculously collided. The view from the 80th floor wasn't about power or wealth. It was about perspective. It was the stark, beautiful proof that sometimes the most courageous act is to speak a quiet truth in a silent room. And that one voice, guided by integrity, could be loud enough to move mountains and reshape a skyline. Elena's story is a powerful reminder that you don't need a title or a position of power to make a world-changing impact. All it takes is courage and integrity. She walked into that room as a waitress invisible to the powerful men deciding a multi-billion-dollar fate. But she walked out as the architect of her own destiny, proving that knowledge, character, and the bravery to speak truth to power are the most valuable assets a person can have. She didn't just save a billionaire's company. She saved his family, exposed a deep-seated betrayal, and in the process reclaimed her own stolen future. What do you think you would have done in her position? It's a tough question. If her story of courage and unexpected triumph resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.